kind of what we're seeing with these pro-Trump rallies, kind of to be the against the Black Lives Matter rally, or like we saw in Kenosha recently, where the young man came out with the AR-15 and was shooting protesters. Would you say that's kind of...
Yeah, and one of the things I perhaps didn't make as clear in the essay as it should have is it's always important to remember that there is a distinction between Trump's electoral base, namely the people who show up to the polls to vote for him, and his mass base, which is much broader and much wider than the electoral base. And I think that's sort of where the so-called lumpenproletariat comes into play. These are the people who show up at the rallies. These are the people who show up with the guns. These are the people who storm the Michigan and the Idaho State House and run people down with cars. And of course, unfortunately, what we also see is in those cases that the police tend to stand on the sidelines and nod their approval.
Oh, that was actually pretty disgusting. They were handing them water.
Yeah.
What do you think is helping Trump galvanize this group of people, this lumpenproletariat, if you will?
Well, this is one of the things I emphasize in the book, which of course is much longer than the essay, is that this has been a very long process of class formation. This so-called white lumpenproletariat has been in a process of formation, probably going back to the mid-1980s, certainly the 1980s, largely as a consequence of deindustrialization. And these are former working class people who've lost their jobs. And if you use the examples, it's the closed steel mills in Pennsylvania, the iron mines in Minnesota, the coal mines in West Virginia, the auto factories in Michigan. People who lost their jobs in industries, and I would argue primarily due to automation. Or in the case of coal, we just are not using it as much because all of it. But as these jobs don't come back, I would argue that on the one hand, liberal Democrats have suggested, well, you should go to college. Even recently, Joe Biden said to a bunch of coal miners, you need to learn how to code. So liberal Democrats have offered them nothing. But what Trump has offered them is two things. One, he's offered them an explanation for their situation. Blame it on the immigrants, blame it on the black people, but don't blame it on the capitalists who automated your jobs out of existence, right? Blame it on globalization. So he offers them first an explanation, and then, of course, he offers them as a nostalgic solution. We're going to go back to the good old days. I'm going to bring those jobs back. I'm going to bring those factories back. And of course, he hasn't done any of that. And even if he succeeded, it wouldn't matter because the types of jobs in those facilities are now so high tech that the people who were working there 30 years ago wouldn't be qualified for those jobs. So you create this massive kind of lumpenproletariat of deindustrialized former workers who are justifiably very dissatisfied, very unhappy, despondent, in despair, no prospects for the future or for their children. And we're now into a situation where we are into the second or third generation of this class formation. And Trump is the only person who has offered them an explanation and offered them a solution, as false as it may be.
All right. Happy Saturday. We're doing a special live stream this Saturday. That was a recent clip I made recently, but from a conversation I had probably like 3 or 4 months ago from Professor Clyde Barrow, who wrote a book about comparing Trump and kind of, he calls it his shock troops to Marx's 18th Brumaire and Napoleon III. So first and foremost, let me introduce my co-host, my homie, my dog, Pascal Robert.
Jason, how you living, my brother? What's going on?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right. We had a very exciting conversation in the virtual green room, if you will. I said there was going to be a special guest today, and the special guest is another friend of show, When COVID's over, we'll be friends in real life. Dan Larson of Toy Galaxy.
I'm going to say good afternoon because it is technically afternoon my time.
It's afternoon.
Well,
it's morning for me. I had to wake up. I woke up early today to make sure I was ready for this. And I promised everybody that we were going to have special guests. So I will introduce the first special guest. He has still the most viewed show that I've done on the history of neoliberalism, diving deeper. He was like, David Harvey didn't go deep enough. I got the facts. I got the receipts. Derek Varn.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I was just parroting Philip Morowski's work, but yes.
And coming all the way from the great state of Missouri, have the home. He's on everybody's show. I'm kind of mad that he did his Kurdistan history with Ben Burgess. I was actually going to ask him to do one of those for my show, but Ben Burgess already got it and it's already up. So there's no sense of him doing it again. So my feelings is hurt. Mean Gene Bajlan.
Hi there. Well, you know, Ben's video is behind a paywall. I'm always willing to go on your show and talk Kurdistan.
So I got the super friends of the super friends back because nobody watches DC. Okay, we have the Avengers of leftist politics today. Dan hit me up. I'd hit up Dan. I'll be honest with you guys. Originally, the idea for this show was to have a Zero Books author, Dr. Michael Harris, who wrote a book of using Star Wars as a grand narrative for the left. He just finished a book about the Hunger Games, using Hunger Games as kind of an example of capitalism's failed society. And I was going to have Michael Harris, Dan Larson, of course, my co-host Pascal, and then I was going to hit up these guys kind of on the underrank. Michael goes, I can't do it, man. I just moved across lands again and shit is all bad. So Dan is like, hey, let's do this. So I was like, hey, Pascal, you want to get up early on Saturday? Then I said, hey, Derek, you want to get up early on Saturday? So thank you guys for getting up early on Saturday. This should be fun. So I will start it off. Here we are. We are what? Not even a week out of the events. Was it Monday? Where a mix of QAnon, conspiracy theorists, MAGA heads, Proud Boys, all bought into the current administration's narrative, the false claims of the election was stolen. So after a Trump rally, they went to go steal the Capitol, kind of, sort of. A few people died. Yesterday, was it yesterday? Trump's Twitter was finally shut down. I don't know if you guys remember Kamala Harris. Do you remember her on the debate stage asking for, demanding actually that Twitter shut down his Twitter feed, which did not happen. So my question is, now that his Twitter is gone and people are calling for him to be impeached, are we now building back better?
I think we're building back more opportunity for an actual true iteration of someone who can be an operational fascist, unlike Trump, who has no ideology or actual discipline.
Yeah, this is the 18th premiere of Joe Biden.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, you know, I no longer know where the threat's coming from anymore, honestly, because what I have been shocked about this time around is within 3 days, I've seen people, including normally neutral sites, go off on how our domestic terror laws are too weak. Because only the people who planted the bombs at the Capitol and maybe the people hanging the noose could possibly, an effigy, but it could be construed as a real threat, could possibly be prosecuted under domestic terrorism laws, that we couldn't throw it at the entire debacle. And furthermore, that we should resurrect the insurrection laws, which are on the books and would apply. I mean, they would to these to this what I like to call the Freedom Freikorps. So people know that I'm not defending them. It's actually, the lumpen element of this, I think, is true. But there's another element of it that isn't discussed. And if you look at who got caught in that crowd, they weren't all lumpen. A lot of them are former Marine, military. Okay, that's part of it. But a lot of them are also small business owners. They're also the Trump money base, which, if you look at the demographic polling on who was the consistent voter for Trump, it is people in poor parts of the country, but that make over 100K a year, but under 200K a year, which is a very specific demographic group. We would, in Marxist terms, we call them the petit bourgeois. And what I see right now is like people calling for more and more domestic terror laws, and I'm actually watching people gear up to I don't normally love the quote Glenn Greenwald for a variety of reasons, but he pointed out that Oliver Darcy is calling for cable networks to deplatform Fox News, OAN, and Newsmax. Now, I hate all those networks, and I think they do spread propaganda, but I also think MSNBC spreads propaganda, as well. I mean, they were the biggest spinners of Russiagate nonsense. Now, I say this not actually even implying that they're the same. Like, Russiagate nonsense actually has more lines of kind of true than a lot of the right-wing conspiracy theories, but it was still nonsense. Like, it was a bunch of things that were kind of true to take, that did happen, to actively make a narrative that wasn't true. Now, on the other side, you don't even need the actively partially true to do this. But I'm mortally scared because I'm seeing these people say we should fight polarization with domestic terror laws. I can actually point out a representative said it this yesterday. That's scary. When you combine that with the fact that the media was already making equivalence between anarchists and the Freedom Freikorps on Wednesday, that you're seeing a build up by a man, by the way, that I should remind people pushed the first the building blocks for the Patriot Act in 1995 with his Counterterrorism Act, and was a major architect on the Democratic sign off on the Patriot Act itself. So
you're saying Joe Biden is a bit of a hawk?
A bit.
Oh, definitely.
But we don't have the resources to fight a foreign war anymore. Let's be honest. And when I say resources, yeah, we have infinite money and machines, but there's not the political will to do so. But you maybe can get up a domestic I don't know. I mean, we're talking about the return of core world politics. I could easily see a Red Scare. And just to remind people, the apparatus used to attack the first Red Scare was used to attack fascists in America. But then immediately, as soon as that threat was even slightly suppressed, was used for the next 15 years to attack the left and decimated it almost entirely.
What was your take, Dan?
With respect to what specifically? Because a lot happened in the last 5 days.
when you saw Viking Jamiroquai, what was the first thing you saw?
Christ. I had the same initial reaction that I think a lot of people had, that this has been coming for a long time. Any sort of comments about like there was no intelligence, we had no idea this was going to happen, is just ridiculous. I mean, anybody who's been on social media at any point for any amount of time for the last 4 years has seen something like this coming. And I know that you have to just draw some distinction between people talking tough online, which is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, versus people that are actually making constructive, active plans to do things and execute them. There was this long time conversation about, are we taking Trump seriously? Or are we taking him literally? Like, how do we actually interpret the things that he's saying? And I always trusted that there were people, CIA, FBI, whatever, that could tell the difference and were monitoring the difference and were actually able to distinguish one from the other. And that there was just a lot of garbage nonsense. And unfortunately, we normalized a lot of that and got used to a lot of the things and the way that he said these things on Twitter and social media. I learned the lesson throughout the 4 years that, Twitter is not the real world. My parents don't know anything about what's going on Twitter. So, these moment by moment things that occur and this buildup that, this growing snowball that's coming down the hill, that's very apparent to me because I'm locked in on Twitter following all these developments. Like, they don't see that happening. And so, there's these issues of the different sources of media and what's actually occurring. So I felt betrayed by the fact that it could get to that point, first off, and that authorities would dare insult the intelligence of every person in this country by claiming that they didn't see it coming. That forces you to pivot to, are they serious? And in that case, if they're serious, they all got to go, because my friends who aren't, this locked into it, take it more seriously than that. So either they're lying, either they're serious and they need to be removed, or they're lying and they knew it was coming and they voluntarily chose not to do it. I had the news on while it was all happening during the demonstration. And when they made that announcement that the request for National Guard had been put in and that the Department of Justice, headed by Donald Trump, had declined it, that's when I really, really started to get those sort of like, oh, I remember where I was standing and how I felt on 9/11. Like, this is something different than what I thought I was watching. I thought I was watching a protest get out of control, and the DC police and National Guard and those, they take care of it. They're not, as they funneled into the Capitol building, as they pulled down American flags and put up Trump flags, as the police just stepped aside and let them in, and then the National Guard gets declined. That's when I realized that this was a much, much scarier thing that we were watching happening in real time. Ted Cruz is on the floor of, decline, trying to overturn the electoral votes. And you start to see all these things. You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to just watch what's happening and say, this was happening while this was happening while this was happening. And it's still happening right now.
Pascal?
I mean, one of the first questions that I asked when I saw this whole developing was that how many cops were amongst the protesters? In other words, how many people who were actually traveled in to participate in this endeavor were cops themselves, or cops from different municipalities in different places? Because when I'm seeing, Capitol Police taking selfies with guys who are supposed to be domestic terrorists and smiling, I know that's supposed to be the new police protocol. But I'm saying, well, maybe maybe the Capitol Police have had some kind of inner kind of conversations with some of these protesters, and they establish, hey, some of these people are our people. Because let's not forget that Donald Trump was the first presidential candidate to get nationally endorsed by, major police forces from urban areas throughout the country. I mean, that had not happened before. So Trump had major police support. And I think that, what Dan was talking about in terms of how there was almost this kind of tacit green light of a tinge of let them get away with this, these people can't be that bad, it wasn't even tacit. I mean, when we have video of Trump in his quote unquote bunker, watching the developments on screen with his sons and his wife, and they're all listening to 70s disco, maybe eating caviar or God knows what else. I mean, it tells me that this thing is not being viewed by certain people as anything, transgressive at all. They're looking at this as an opportunity to make their point. Rudy Giuliani talking about like, let's have trial by combat. I mean, this is obscene rhetoric, but it's obscene rhetoric when you realize that now in America, the reactionary right wing is where all the revolutionary energy of transforming the ruling class exists in America. Once upon a time in America, the left, in the name of trying to develop economic justice, social justice, racial justice, and trying to have some kind of public goods governance, or even trying to challenge the state overall, were the people who were putting that pressure on the ruling class. And at certain points were actually feared because they could destabilize segments of society. But today, the nominal left is so weak that we have to sit down and twiddle our thumbs and watch these reactionary, goons cosplay radicalism and take up space, and all of a sudden have all these policing policies come down from the federal legislature that we know in the end will be used against leftists. I don't see why anyone is applauding Trump being kicked off Twitter when the next person is going to be kicked off Twitter or Facebook might be the left publication that you like to read because they're considered to be a threat to the Biden administration, or criticisms of Biden are considered to be outside of the pale of a certain type. So I don't see this as particularly a moment for celebration for those of us who traditionally have oppositional politics. I think it's a moment for concern. Not that we should be sympathetic to Trump and his acolytes,
No,
but we should also realize that this hammer is not only going to be coming down on them.
and it's already come down on a lot of us. I don't know if people remember. I think it was a few years ago when Alex Jones got deplatformed, and everybody clapped for that. A lot of people got throttled, if you will, on the left, and they weren't getting the same views they were getting. You weren't coming up in Google searches anymore. And now, I don't know if it's happening to you, Derek. I don't know if you promote your shows at all on social media, but I can't even promote any of these shows because of the title of the show. So even if I make the title of the show, I'm talking about, literally had a show with a guy that created a cartoon my son likes. And that's what we talked about, was about cartoon. We did talk a little bit politics shit, but it wasn't like this conversation, right? We weren't talking about season of means of production and fucking Disney. So that show I was told that it violated the terms and conditions. And I'm like, why am I violating terms and conditions? And it says accidental leftist Chico Bonbon, monkey with the tool belt. And it was because there's no more political posts right now until the tech powers that be say so, or you can't boost them. But on the flip side of that, in the Georgia runoff, was it Kelly Loeffler? I believe that's her name. She was able to put up all kinds of posts. Those ads were allowed to go. But cats like us, we couldn't promote our stuff. Mean Gene Bajlan.
Hey, how's it going? Can you all hear me? The internet in Missouri seems to be playing up. We don't have great internet around here, so I apologize for that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you guys have touched on this already, but the banning of Trump on Twitter, it's kind of cathartic. It's kind of deserved. And I'm not crying too many tears, but it does really raise this issue of, who gets to control these social media, monopolies. These are entirely new kind of fields that used to exist, that didn't used to exist. And the social media, it functions by being a monopoly so that people could one another. So we have this really serious issue of like, what do we do about this? Evidently, in my opinion, having oligarchs control access to what has become, in effect, the town square in the modern era is deeply problematic. And the question is not about being a free speech absolutist or not. I think there are cases to be made for people to be banned from social media. In the Middle East, in South Asia, Twitter and social media has been used to incite extremely bloody and violent pogroms. And, we do need some kind of checks and balances on what is, spread on social media. So the question, which I don't have an answer to, is, how do we ensure some kind of democratic control over social media in our modern era? And I think it's a nightmare to think about because, the question is not just national. You can have the United States regulate Twitter, but then what about countries around the world? Does America's foreign policy enemies going to be banned from social media? Are the leaders of Iran going to be banned from social media? Are social media companies going to do what other authoritarian governments say, for example, in places like Turkey, where they will say ban these opposition figures here and there? It speaks to the fact that there needs to be and I don't know how this is realizable in the current global situation, but some kind of international organization to deal with these issues of social media. The problem is, like who gets to decide about these things. It's a lot like space. Space is is a field that is inevitably going to be a center of conflict, and there needs to be some kind of international body that can deal with space and the internet. But how do we get there? How do we ensure that such institutions are true? Have democratic representation? That's a question I don't know how to do. But the issue with social media is deeply problematic.
Is it as problematic as your Wi-Fi?
Yeah, that is a good question. My Wi-Fi is deeply
giving you a hard time because I'm supposed to. Pascal, you look like you want to say something.
No, I'm generally in agreement with the concerns here. I'm just glad that we are realizing that the banning of Trump from Twitter creates a whole set of problems that I think many people, who are just the normal liberals who are like, yay, Trump is banned from Twitter, wonderful. And because they have no oppositional politics. These are people who are general status quo lackeys, and they will go along with, whatever the police state or the imperialist government wants to lay down. But when you come from a political tradition that questions the actions of the state and the federal government that it takes abroad, at home and abroad, then you realize that those traditional forces, they come for us, and they've been coming for us for a long time. So I think that there needs to be a little bit more reticence on our side when we're seeing what's being done for Trump, and we should be more active in proposing that we may have to have some kind of, constitutional Bill of Rights when it comes to the internet, or perhaps, changing these internet companies into, utilities, or, transforming the way they're managed or governed, making them utilities and taking them totally out of the hands of these oligarchs, because this is the new space of discourse. And, we can debate the propriety of saying that you have a right to speak on social media, but you can't, because we really don't have that right. But perhaps we need to reconfigure the definition of the internet as a public utility. That's a conversation that we should have in terms of what gives you access to be able to use it and control it, and decenter that power in the hands of those oligarchs, frankly, out of the public good.
Are you guys a little afraid of, because of, and I feel like everybody's kind of touched on this. So the new administration is building back better. So one thing that Joe Biden campaigned on after the Bernie Sanders power move that happened on that Tuesday was that nothing was going to fundamentally change if this administration came into power, right? So the neoliberals working with the neoconservatives, i.e., the Lincoln Project. Is this what restoring the soul of America looks like?
Cutting Trump's Twitter? Is that the question?
It's like, because a lot of people are rejoicing at the cutting of the Twitter because they feel like that these people came out of nowhere, like they didn't exist until Trump came to be. And I feel like everybody on this panel knows that there is a long list of reasons how this situation came to be, and it did not start in 2016 with Donald Trump and a MAGA hat. That wasn't even the first time we heard "Make America Great Again." All of us here are old enough to remember Ronald Reagan literally running on that same slogan in 1980.
Yeah, 1980, when the year I was born.
And did he do it again in 84? Or 84 was like, fuck it.
I don't think he 84 he won so badly. I don't think he had to dive that deeply to come up with it.
And we have to remember too, if you watch that Reagan documentary, they show his debate with Walter Mondale in 84.
Yep.
He's so bad at this point that he totally forgets what he's saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's
and he won 525 electoral votes in the 84 election.
He won every state except the state that Mondale was from.
Yeah.
Where was Mondale from? Is Mondale from Missouri?
Minnesota.
Yeah, I mean, that's the deep reactionary core of American politics is the deep reactionary core of American politics, right? Like it's not new. Nor, I come from the deep South. I've talked to Jason about this before. One thing I will say though, about to take on, I'm both concerned and not concerned about the Twitter thing. And I was going to pick up on something else Dan Larson was talking about. And I'm going to give a brief story from my own life because I like to do that sometimes to get people to understand why I feel some of the ways I do. The situation on Wednesday had many of the people who are pearl clutching right now basically totally we're supporting, we're calling for these people to come and do the insurrection and calling for the illegitimacy of the election for a while. And this tactic has been primarily a conservative tactic now going all the way back through the Obama administration. But unfortunately, I have to be honest, it also kicked up in 2004 with the calling for irregularities in the die bolt machines in Ohio. Yeah. And my point about that is not that I know or don't know who was at fault in Ohio if there was irregularities. Our election laws are so arcane and anti-democratic, and there's literally 50 different versions of them that I don't care how good you are, it's always going to look sketchy because of how arcane it is. But my point about the pick up on what Dan's saying is that I lived through. I was literally in a nearby neighborhood in Ma'adi in Egypt on April 9th, 2017, when a Daesh aligned, split off of the Muslim Brotherhood, blew up a Coptic church, killing 44 people that literally rattled the windows of my apartment, and I could look out and see the fire.
Make sure to drink water.
Appropriate. And immediately, the internet was censored. Okay, fine. It's always the case in Egypt. In fact, they immediately cut off access to Al Jazeera because Al Jazeera's government was not aligned with the LCC and Saudi government. They then immediately reinstated the National Security Act. which is what Mubarak governed under from 1978 or 1979 all the way through the Arab Spring. And Al-Sisi was able to use that to Al-Sisi was able to use that to completely undo everything that Tahrir Square had done. And the point that makes this similar to what Dan Larson was saying and similar to what happened on Wednesday, even though it was nowhere near as severe, that was more or less allowed to happen in Egypt. So people knew that Daesh was targeting churches, and the government did not provide the requested for protection for that church on Palm Sunday. They undersent protection for it. And on Wednesday, and I agree with Dan. You don't have to be a conspiracy theory to see this. The DOJ advised put a kibosh on the DOD activating the National Guard ahead of time to show preemptive force. So the police, whether or not they sympathize with the protesters or not, had to rely on de-escalation tactics, because they knew if they started firing randomly, what happened, which was that one woman getting shot, would have happened over and over again. And given that some of the people in the group were armed, although probably less than I initially thought, that they were not as armed to the teeth as I would have thought they would have been, frankly, that it could have resulted in a firefight in a way that they could not control. I think that the politicians on the Republican side thought that this would be like a normal rally. They would let them get into the rotunda, and then that would stop. They did not expect them to start going through the windows, because I don't think they really believed that these people believed their own shit posts. I mean, like, I'm serious, but it was an immediate opportunity for all factions of American life to get rid of a problem that had been a problem for it for a long time. And that is like the explicit face of Trumpism. And I mean, I don't think it was planned, but I do think people just basically allowed it to happen because they thought they could control it, and it would be politically useful, and frankly, politically useful for both sides of the aisle.
Dan, you wanted to pontificate?
Yeah. So going back to this idea of Trump's Twitter, and is it right? Is it legal? Is it a harbinger of awful things to come? Is Biden going to get his cut if he starts to go out of line as far as what Jack at Twitter thinks should or should not be in the public forum? Is it even a public forum? There's the bigger issues of the fact that we're still dealing as a planet with what the implications of all this technology means. I graduated from college in 1998, had my first email address, which I still have, and it was at that time still not even remotely approaching what it is now. This sort of rise of all these conspiracy theories and whatever, like, this stuff's always been around. Like, people are still debating whether or not we landed on the moon, whether or not, Kennedy was assassinated by the CIA, all this stuff. It's just that the internet and Twitter and Reddit and Discord and all of this stuff has allowed all of these, your one town kook, to be able to contact the other town's kook and get together and talk about their kookiness, right? It's just easier. It's more facilitated. And now they can organize. And when you have the people who do have this sort of military, tactical, actual knowledge, then you end up with these two groups of people that we saw at this rally. The weird old grandmas who literally don't know what they're doing. They don't know why they're there. They're waving their little flags. They're not even coherent and figuring out what's going on. But then you have those tactical people who had the zip tie handcuffs. Their faces were covered. They've got guns and tasers and bulletproof vests on. They know where the offices are. They know what files to get. It's two different people involved there. But to the point of Twitter, you immediately saw last night. This is so fresh. This is last night. And I know there's like this sort of time warp that keeps happening and has been happening since March. It's like, was that 2 weeks ago or was that today? I can't even remember. It was last night, right? We're not even 24 hours out from it yet. But you immediately, within 5 minutes of his account being deactivated, you immediately saw calls for, why isn't this authoritarian's account being silenced? Why isn't this authoritarian's? Why aren't all these other accounts being turned off? If what he's saying is bad and deserves to have his account deleted, then all of these other people do too. And you started to see this sort of real-time snowball effect. And what I'll say is that, not that I'm here to defend Jack at Twitter, but Trump had to do a lot before they decided to finally pull the plug, right? And of course that can get worse and be used against the wrong people, but they didn't. They still haven't cut off any of these other, authoritarian leaders' Twitter accounts and such. Ultimately, I would default back to the fact that Twitter is a private entity, and under the traditional rules of our society and the planet and the way things work, they get to make those terms of service until such time as the rules change. For now, that's it. You can get kicked off of Twitter for saying, something about Trump. They can just suspend your account.
Yep.
And if you don't like it, too bad. Now, my other issue is that Donald Trump is the goddamn president of the United States still.
Mm-hmm.
And for 4 years, he has been the most powerful man on the planet. That's not an exaggeration. That's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And if this man wanted to speak right now, right this second, if he legitimately had something to say to the planet, to the people of the United States, to Ted fucking Cruz, all he has to do is go down the hallway to this room where there's all these cameras that will cut into like every news, every channel on the planet. They'll be hung on his every word. So what of value has been lost here? His shit posts, or his ability to incite the kooks in every town? And is that tactically, strategically dangerous and a legitimate national threat? Of course it is. So, yeah, there's fears about where this could go. But in the immediate moment, as of right now, I think it was the right move.
But also, we forget that a lot of this that we're seeing, and well, maybe we don't forget. I guess everybody's been saying it has been happening for some time. Donald Trump started on Twitter in 2010? With in 2012, definitely he fell down the rabbit hole of birtherism, which is very scary. Donald Trump called for some violent action against Ilhan Omar 4 years ago. So it wasn't like this man hasn't been inciting some violence. I mean, shit. To Dan's point about how slow time moves, when was it that them fools tried to kidnap the governor in Michigan?
I think it was 15 years ago. It was like 2 weeks ago. I don't know. It's like, was it 3 months ago?
It was in the fall. It was this fall.
Yeah.
What, was it even the fall? I think that shit happened. Was it November, December? Somebody on the internet. We got to chat. Somebody on Google machine got to know.
I guess I want to push back up on that a little bit.
Okay.
And not because they should have. Honestly, you're right. They should have removed her for violation. I mean, Trump for violations of terms of service for I don't know, way before he was even president.
Way before he was president.
It becomes a lot harder once he is. And Twitter allowed him to circumvent that. It's coming up in the thing. He truly did allow him to circumvent the Hatch Act. However, him being removed from Twitter actually isn't what interested me as much as everyone else who was removed from Twitter and the immediate expansionary calls. And to that wasn't just for authoritarian leaders. It's also for news networks like that. I mean, I can cite you a former conservative, Oliver Darcy, was calling for cable providers to be held legally accountable for the actions of people listening to things like OAN, etc. And that is what scares me about this. And the other thing that we are not talking about that I do sort of worry about.
Speak on it.
Parler has been a mess that has been violating, has been potentially violating Google's terms of service for a long, long time. All right. Trump goes on it to get around his Twitter ban. And it is immediately deplatformed by Google. They throw out a warning, and then 10 minutes later, they say they didn't act fast enough on that warning and deplatform Parler for advocating acts beyond, and they probably have, but the thing is, they have been for months. And so it is clear to pretty much everybody that this is a very shallow political calculus. And I want to be like also pretty clear on this as someone who both lived through this kind of repression and somewhere else, and is noticing how much stuff is being shut down on the social media platforms. Is I also don't know how to handle this, because you are completely right that Trump has violated the terms of Twitter service for, like, I don't know, 10 years. But they only started cracking down and even like putting warnings on his stuff like a year ago. They really only cracked down on him. He's for a suspension twice. And when they suspended him permanently, if I am completely honest, they did it without him doing anything.
Yep.
And that's their right, but it also means that their terms of service are not on an issue by issue thing. And it does just, it looks really bad and really coordinated with the Democrats. And if these people want to use these alternative platforms, they can do it as they want to. I've been more scared about these people going underground like they did in the 70s, because I don't know, like, this is before a lot of our time, but there was a lot of right-wing, there's a lot of left-wing domestic terrorism, but most of it didn't kill anybody. There was a lot of right-wing domestic terrorism that did. And that was in a time where media was controlled and they didn't have access. They figured out alternative ways, and they can do it again. And that's where I am also like, I'm not sure this is going to be as effective as we think it's going to be. That's I think where I'm at. And I am worried that this looks just totally politically callous at a time that can reintroduce a victim's narrative, but it is their right to do. And frankly, this is where I agree with Dan. They should have done it years ago. If they were gonna hold them accountable, they should have held them accountable. They weren't hurting anybody accountable according to their things for 5-10 years, but it should have been around 2014, 2015.
I would add that I think one of the problems with moderating social media is, and I think Vaughn's kind of like hinting at this, is the fact that there isn't a kind of equal application of the principles that are supposed to guide the terms of service and whether you violated them or not. So it seems entirely arbitrary when people get deplatformed or not, or what they get deplatformed, what they get kicked off the social media for. And that is a real problem, and again feeds into the kind of victim narrative that strengthens the political right in the United States. Because if you just look at things on the surface, you have plenty of left-wing Twitter going on, guillotining people and eating the rich, and talking about this kind of violence, which obviously it's kind of kind of a joke or an in-joke, but right-wing figures could plausibly make the case to people that, look, they're allowing this kind of hate speech on their social media. This is a conspiracy against us. So, I don't think there's a social media conspiracy against right-wing political figures. That's not what I'm saying. But, it's about building that narrative, and, right-wing politics is essentially based upon the narrative by which the, oppressors recast themselves as being the oppressed and victimized. Just look at someone like Josh Hawley, my senator from the great state of Missouri, and Jason knows my opinions on Josh Hawley, but I don't think I can share exactly how I've described him before. But he's going on using this discourse because he got his lucrative book deal canceled. So I agree. This is why I can't really wrap my head around things like social media, because it's the internet and social media is kind of like is a commons, right? But it's a commons that's been privatized. And we end up with this kind of arbitrary application of the terms of service agreement. And, at the end of the day, this stuff isn't even regulated by human beings half the time. When you go to places like YouTube, it's just algorithms. So it's deeply problematic in terms of this kind of unequal distribution, unequal application of the rules to people on social media.
What movie or cartoon, Dan, can you think of that closely mirrors the point that we're at right now?
I think we're definitely approaching Minority Report territory. If you're not familiar with Minority Report, the whole idea was that they had predictive technology that could determine whether or not you were going to commit a crime in the future.
Do you know that actually exists?
I know that there are algorithms that are working on it.
There's a good book called Weapons of Math Destruction.
Oh, yeah, that's a good book. Yeah.
Cathy O'Neil. And in the book, she tells a story about this predictive software, and she uses Minority Report as the example. So, of course, wherever cops get a lot of arrests, they're putting the data into the AI, and the AI is saying, okay, well, these are all the arrests that are happening in this area. So what it's also doing is finding out who these people live near.
Well, what happened? What happened in Britain?
Was it Brooklyn?
No, in Great Britain, they had this issue with the algorithm. So because of COVID, they had to cancel the general examinations that they had for students. In Britain, we have kind of two levels of examinations, GCSEs and A levels. Mm-hmm. And these, predict whether you go on to further college or whether you go on to university. But because of COVID, they couldn't actually hold the examinations. So they used a kind of formula, an algorithmic formula, to assign people their grades. And this ignored what teachers wanted to give their grades. And what it turned out was that all the rich kids who went to private school had their grades inflated, and all the poorer kids had their grades decreased.
I'm shocked.
It was a huge scandal. It was actually quite brilliant for exposing the lie of meritocracy, because you would then have all these like Tory ministers and like wealthy aristocrats coming on the TV and going, well, don't worry, son, I got 4 Ds at A level, and I went to work in the city, and it was perfectly fine, and now I'm a director of the BBC. This kind of nonsense. But these algorithms, this case in the summer with the GCSEs really shows the danger of like this Minority Report situation, where your circumstances are just basically entered into a computer, and that's how you live. That's how your life is determined.
Well, in the book, I'll just be real quick. In the book, what Cathy O'Neil states is that cops knocked on the door of a young man that had never committed a crime, knocked on his door, and told him, "We're watching you," because he lived near people that had got arrested for some petty crime. So now the cops are knocking on people's door going, "We're watching you." Yeah. And that's literally the precogs, I guess you would say, of Minority Report. So I'll shut up.
But the algorithm of that is really pernicious, because how they're deciding is what is already being policed, which is going to be poor and minority neighborhoods. Of course, there's going to be more arrest in poor minority neighborhoods because there's more policing there. There are also more social problems. So you have it on both ends. That, of course, drives more instances, which feed back into more policing, which feeds back into more instances. So you have a compounding feedback loop in the algorithm. Mm-hmm. But I work in education, so I know a lot of this in education. And in America, we just don't talk about it, so it never becomes a scandal. But I'm somewhat serious about that. My favorite dark stat related to this sort of predictive policing problem and all this, it's tied into education, is that most states plan their prison cell numbers off of 4th grade literacy scores.
Whoa.
That's a fact.
Whoa.
So like there's literally a way in which the educational standardization and the feedback loop is part of the incarcerational planning of most states. And if you know anything about how access to these things compounds, regardless of how you feel about intelligence or whatever, you can actually actively see how, again, you have a feedback loop, and one that is actually particularly in states with felon laws, one that is actually advantageous for political parties to manipulate. Because, for example, in Georgia, and I don't know if this was still true, but it was true during the aughts. I'm pretty sure it's still true. You can count a non-voting prison population to inflate the numbers of representations in a district. And I think you can, but that is not just I don't think that's just in like the southern and midwestern states. I think I've read that that's also true in New York. So, and so there is a literal incentive for this to happen because you can boost up your representational pool by having a prison in your area and having it overfilled, because those can count towards your census for how many representatives you get during a district drawing, but they don't get to vote.
Can you hear us, Gene?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah, we see everybody. Pascal, did you have anything to say about predictive policing?
I mean, I think that this is kind of the norm that we see in the trajectory of, police being given military weapons, the development of SWATs after the New Left in the late 60s, the development of the whole kind of hyper militarizing of police. I don't see this predictive policing as being outside of the realm of negotiation here, because one thing that we have to understand is that, the police are the protectors of the interests of property and capital in a capitalist society. And as much as we talk about defunding the police, we have to realize is that all of these rather extreme manifestations of policing are taking place at a time of increased precarity in society, meaning that financial capitalism and capitalism in general is not allowed to provide the kind of quality of life that most assume that it would compared to their parents. And as a result, the calculation is that there's going to be more social dislocation, and that there's going to be a need for people to be warehoused. The reserve labor of our army of labor is going to need to be warehoused in prisons. So regardless of how we reconfigure the resources, when people talk about we might be defending the cops, we also might be having private Pinkerton police departments as well.
Yeah.
So I don't think that people say defund police, and they say, do you support defund the police? I say I support ending the phenomenon that make police necessary, which is capitalism.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Musical agreement there.
Dan, you had something to say?
So just backtracking and taking one step back here to social media deactivations, deplatformings, that type of stuff. It has last night, especially because this happened last night. It had a little bit of that flavor of after all the Black Lives Matter protests, when all these corporations started popping up and saying like, we got to put out an ad, we got to put out a statement, we got to make a thing. Netflix has it as like its banner every time you log in. It's like, we stand with all of our, and a lot, and it was feeling a bit performative, which we know now at this point, because we're in the future now, that a lot of it was performative. Some companies have actually implemented policies. We'll see in the future how that stuff actually bears out, whether or not it actually has any impact on their hiring, on their internal equality, on the diversity of their teams, and those sorts of things. But it did start to feel a little bit like that, where Google did it because Apple did it, and then after Apple did it and Google did it, then Discord had to do it. Then it felt like that. Now, following up with that, I do believe that, again, from a national security perspective, the active planning is happening for the next event. We've already seen reports that are saying that January 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, that there are already active reports, chatter, coordination building for another event. especially if there's no real consequences from this event, because why wouldn't they? You know, Kyle Rittenhouse is not in jail right now, so who cares? Like, whatever. And I know nobody here wants me to bring up Tom Nichols, who is a never Trumper person. I started following him. He teaches at the Naval War College. After the election in 2016, I realized that I had to broaden my scope of voices that I was paying attention to from both sides, right? Like, I don't want to pull a both sides thing here, but I went deeper with, you know, diversity on all levels of the political spectrum. Now, I've since trimmed back a lot. I'm not following all these people anymore, but I'm bringing up Tom Nichols to make the point that he has consistently beat the drum for we want Trump on Twitter saying this dumb shit all the time. We want him in the public making these statements publicly so that we can keep an eye on it, so that we can monitor it, because, like, I'm not sure who just said it. We don't want them planning in the dark. We don't want them planning on these old channels that we can't monitor, that we don't know what's happening now, because now they may actually be planning stuff that we don't know about, and they're going to be able to say they didn't. And then one last point on the what movie is this? 2014 Captain America Winter Soldier, that whole thing with Hail Hydra and whatever, the whole shield helicarriers and stuff, that was the same thing. Predictive technology, identifying targets and eliminating them before they became dangerous. And then since Hydra was in power, they were going to retarget all that stuff at what they considered threats to be, and that was all the good guys. Good guys.
Well, I mean, like, the blatant example of that is just as for all the calls of domestic terrorism being applied. And like I said, and in some specific cases, if we can find out who planted those bombs, yes. You know, I'm always more iffy on sedition and insurrection charges, but even I would even support charging people we knew to be leaders with that. That's well within the bounds of current law. I am very worried about the expansion of law, however, for this stuff. And I am also worried that whatever happens on the 19th or 20th is going to make all that worse, in addition to being probably more terroristic-y than this, because there are real forces here who have real compelled. I mean, but you know, one of the things I like to remind people is like the first war on terror, that wasn't totally made up either. Like, yes, it was actually a result of, you know, 80 years of American foreign policy basically coming home to roost. I mean, we were going to talk about Cold War movies, and I could, like, literally show you Rambo 3 thanking the Mujahideen, and then True Lies depicting them racistly within like a 4 to 6 year period. So, you know, you even see this reflected in our culture. But the threat was real. Then, too, it was over exaggerated to an absurd degree and used to justify things that it never, ever, ever should have touched. And in fact, I would even go so far that, you know, like a lot of the civil libertarians at the time were saying, everything was punishable under existing laws. The only thing that made it look like we needed more laws was either active government malfeasance or government incompetence, which is also the same thing now.
So the original image I was going to use, I'm sorry to cut you off real quick, Gene. I'm going to shut up. I'm going to say this and then I'll let you talk, Gene. The original image I was going to use was going to be Rambo 3, where he's on the horse with the Mujahideen shooting Russians. I was going to use that as the clip, but I figured no one remembered that because it's kind of harder to find Rambo 3 shit. And so I used the image for this show. The ad for the show actually is a banned scene from Red Dawn. The original Red Dawn, the Russians are pointing a tank. The Russians and Cubans are pointing a tank at a McDonald's, and the censors felt that was way too fucked up to show, so they pulled that
through American institutions.
By the way, I want to plug. This is not my book, but a book that handles this very well. National Security Cinema: The Shocking New Evidence of Government Control in Hollywood. This book is about the secrecy, militarism, and manipulation and censorship at the heart of the world's leading democracy, and about those who try to fight them. Using thousands of pages of documents acquired through the Freedom of Information Act, a national security cinema exclusively reveals that the national security state led by the CIA and Pentagon, has worked on more than 800 Hollywood films, over 1,000 network television shows, the scholarship has shown.
Do you think they worked on Law and Order SVU? Because I actually like that show. I don't know why.
Well, I mean, I completely agree with Vaughn on the point about these kind of events being used to like expand the legal apparatus when it's not necessary. I mean, the fundamental problem, Al Qaeda and Islamist terrorism, was a real thing, but you can deal with that under the existing legal framework. It wasn't legal in the year 2000 to fly an airplane into a building. None of this stuff. I was listening to the radio this morning, and there was talk that the Biden administration was, thinking about expanding sort of legal powers. And of course, this is a dangerous precedent because, since 9/11, Americans have been living under kind of the statute of state security and have gotten used to it. So a further sort of pad down that way is not something I think we should see as positive. These people who do these criminal acts should be arrested for the criminal acts that they do, but we shouldn't sort of create a separate category that allows people to political elites to justify a special kind of legal regime that is more oppressive. And then just to the point about the U.S. military and movies, I think you can see on every movie from Transformers to all kinds of movies that have Top Gun or what have you. This is clearly propaganda. It's just in the United States, the state propaganda is just a little bit less obvious because the state involvement is not as overt as in other countries.
To say a few words to pick up on Dan's point about the danger of some of these people being actual terrorists, because I was wanting to make the point that I think not a lot of them, but there are enough real ones in there to be significantly concerned. And I am almost certain, by the way, that we're going to see a lot of this leaderless resistance, random violence that has political motivation increase, mostly from the right, in the next decade. I'm almost certain of it. My point here, though, is that not only do we have the existing legal frameworks to deal with most of this without expanding this to everyone, also I think that what we're learning right now is, let's be honest. I mean, Dan has a point. We have the biggest security apparatus the world has ever known, and yet, they said all this stuff in public. They said it in public, and it didn't matter. And I'm not even calling for people to be arrested. I think 4 people would still be alive today. 5 people would still be alive today, including a cop. If the National Guard had just been there, they probably wouldn't have to have fired a shot. Now, I know one of the unfortunate things about that is that sounds like that legitimates some of the stuff used on BLM earlier in the year, because the National Guard was called in. But I'm just going to maybe take a controversial opinion and say that I don't really trust either the National Guard or the cops, but if I have to pick one, I'm going to pick the National Guard. They are much more likely to come from people from a diverse class background. They're not as likely to come from generations of law enforcement. They are much more politically diverse, actually. And they don't like shooting civilians. It's not their deal. And so, I didn't love when the National Guard was called in on any of the BLM protests, but I actually think it was going to, and I have evidence to back it up, that it was much less violence than local cops handling it. And that's the kind of stuff we should be doing, I think, to prevent more of this, because I agree with Dan. It's coming, and I think it's actually gonna come hard. And I don't know what I am more scared of the government than the Yahoos, but that does not mean I'm not scared of the Yahoos, guys.
The Yahoos, they are frightening. You know, let's be honest here. There's some frightening Yahoos out there. I had a clip originally that I wanted to open the show with, and I think I'm going to play it now. It's a clip from one of my favorite Cold War era movies, the original Red Dawn. I refuse to watch the remake. 2 remakes I will not watch. Karate Kid.
That's because you're a smart, handsome man.
A very good friend of mine actually is a producer on the Will Smith Karate Kid, and I will not watch it. I will, if it's on in the room, I will walk out of the fucking room. That's how much I refuse to see Miyagi's. And Bay Area native Mr. Miyagi is from the Bay. He went to high school in Fairfield, California. He is a Bay dude. And also, for those that don't know, Pat Morita used to open for Red Fox.
Oh, awesome.
So
Pat Morita was a comedian.
Pat Morita was a comedian, and he was a foul comedian. And if you ever heard Pat Morita talks, he sounds like a lot of dudes from the Bay. He's got, because I mean, you don't open for Red Fox for years and, you know, talk like Mr. Miyagi. So right. There apparently is a documentary coming out about the real Pat Morita, which I'm really interested to see, because Cobra Kai, I really enjoyed that. Everybody here has seen Cobra Kai?
Not yet.
I'm aware of it. I have not watched it.
Oh,
I'm still taken aback at we passed the point, real aside, before you play a clip. You know, with the new Star Wars trilogy, Mark Hamill is older than Alec Guinness was when he was playing Obi-Wan Kenobi. So that
I didn't realize that.
Weirder still is that Ralph Macchio is older than Pat Morita was when Pat Morita was playing Mr. Miyagi.
Really?
Yeah.
So Ralph Macchio, hold on, let me put this back. Ralph Macchio is almost 60 years old.
Correct.
Doesn't look a day over 28.
He's wearing a toupee in that shit. I don't care what anybody.
I mean, we do the
math, Paul Rudd stuff.
Like that movie came out 35 years ago or something. No, longer than that. Like 30.
84. Like 84.
Yeah, 36 years ago. So yeah, of course he's older.
And they're bringing back everybody in that shit. They done brought back Kumiko, and Chozan is in the new one.
I was actually wondering where they found some of those people.
So apparently, and I didn't know this, I thought this shit was hilarious. The guy that played Chozan, who was the dude that Daniel, remember when he goes to Japan and everybody speaks English in Okinawa and he beats this Okinawan dude's ass, but then gets scared with the drum.
Right.
But then he goes back home and some white dude yells in his face and he's all scared, which I will never understand. If I went to Japan and fought to the death and saved the child's life during the fucking tsunami, I'm whooping everybody's ass.
That's a different kind of strut you're walking out with now.
Oh man, you get some white boy yelling, man, fuck him up. Fuck.
I got people following me around playing those drums. What did you say? Hit it.
About to fuck him up. So anyway, back to real shit. So my favorite Cold War movie is Red Dawn. Not so much because I believe in the message. I think I like to use Red Dawn when people start talking about communism and the greatness of America and a misunderstanding of imperialism. I try to use Red Dawn and then reverse it for them and say, well, you know, in real life, the insurgency that you see with these kids is really what happens to people that like Afghanistan and Iraq. And I wish Gene was here with his better Wi-Fi. He could probably elaborate even more. But so the movie, if you don't know what Red Dawn is about, Patrick Swayze and C. Thomas Howell and Charlie Sheen and was it Jennifer Grey? And is Leah Thompson isn't the one that passed away, is she? There's somebody else that just recently, Kelly Preston passed away. So Leah Thompson, and they're all fighting the Russians and the Cubans, who for some reason invaded Colorado during.
You could say it was a deep state mission. They got right into the middle of the country.
Yeah, that was the thing. They were like, "Fuck the coast, hit them where it hurts most." In the heartland of America, Colorado. So they run to the hills of Colorado and hide out because they're from the hills of Colorado and they know how to camp and shit and hunt. And so they hide out there and they start making bombs and shit, and they start using guerrilla tactics to fight back against the Cubans and the Russians. And I do have to add that the Cuban general is played by none other than Superfly himself, Ron O'Neal. You have to know that Ron O'Neal is Cuban in this, but he's not Cuban in real life. He's a black man. So here we go.
Miss, maybe you speak at me for a minute, too.
I'll be right back, okay?
You bring girlfriend?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be right here. Bye.
¿Qué es un Wolverine?
Es un animal pequeño, como un tejón, pero terriblemente feroz. También le llaman así al colectivo local de los escolares.
Son bestias en eso. Eventualmente tendrás que matar a cada uno de ellos. Es lo mismo que es en Afganistán. No cesarán nunca.
Pues mira, siempre estuve del lado de los insurrectos. No tengo experiencia en estos casos, pero me parece necesario ganar el apoyo del pueblo. Como los contrarios nuestros en Vietnam decían, ganar sus corazones y sus mentes.
Y perdieron, Ernesto.
Eso es verdad, general.
Las cosas están paradas en el frente, Ernesto. En este momento la moral es esencial. Mantenga a los hombres en los puntos seguros y ya verá cómo olvidarán a esos Wolverines.
¿Está bien? Sí, mira a ver. ¡Y gabarit, tavarish! ¡Ha!
Принесите доктор! Что творится?
So there you go. The sidewalk scene from Red Dawn.
I hate to admit how much I love that terrible movie.
I know why Pascal is upset with the movie and the propaganda from it. I totally get that. But I think when we look at the moment we're at right now, and we look at the fact that this has been shoved down American throats for almost 40 years, they even remade it. And also, let's keep in mind one thing. Mike Pompeo came out and said when the U.S. was trying to invade Cuba through foreign aid, Venezuela, that Venezuela was taking their marching orders from Cuba. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
That was what, last year, 2 years ago?
Yeah.
It
was yesterday. It was yesterday. I'm just kidding. It's the time.
I mean, Cuba's one of those fun places that after the 90s, I have a hard time condemning it. You know what I mean? Like, it's actually great health care. There was some serious stuff in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that I think, but I mean, to give the Cuban government like some credit, they actually don't hide that, what happened in that time period.
Oh,
so,
and they had 165 deaths from COVID for a nation of 65 million people or something like that.
Yeah. It does help that they're an island, not gonna lie, but yes, they have their stuff together, as does Vietnam. And so, like, those are the two, like, when everyone's like painting scary socialist countries, I'm like, you really find Cuba scary now? Maybe I've got that in 1984, but now This brings me to, I have actually seen the Red Dawn remake, which don't. And
guy, because it's not Cuba, right?
no, it's not Cuba. So originally the bad guy was gonna be China, but Chinese purchasing power is too high, and B, so capitalism saves China.
They need China to watch.
Right, and they need China to watch it. So they were like, okay, we'll make it North Korea. And I'm like, I'm supposed to believe that North Korea alone. Now, and this came out, by the way, when I lived in South Korea. So this is even funnier. That North Korea alone could invade and take over the west coast of the United States with no help.
I mean, for me, the thing that's interesting here, right, is like, how come no one ever asked the question, how many military bases around the world does North Korea, Cuba, or China have compared to the 800 plus military bases that the United States has around the world? So why isn't that the measurement of who's considered a bigger threat?
Well,
Hollywood needs a bad guy.
Right.
Hollywood needs a bad guy.
Hey, to your point, Jay. No, I don't want to interrupt you real quick. It's okay to like. It's totally okay to like this stuff. One of the main themes that run through all of our episodes on Toy Galaxy when we're talking about all this '80s nostalgia and these things is GI Joe propaganda. Is it okay to like RoboCop? We're trying to educate you on what was happening in this thing, where it came from, why these themes pop up. It is 100% fine to be like, I still love it. It's fun. I like watching robots, punch evil guys and whatever. That's okay to like this stuff. It's just more about like knowing what's happening, knowing why this exists and the message that they're trying to communicate and what they're getting out of it.
I want to add one thing, Dan, before you go, Derek. So Dan and I did an episode a few months back, and I put some clips up from it that I thought were really good. And I had one negative comment, and this person said, you sitting around with Dan Larson celebrating child labor. I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? Talking about toys made by child labor.
Yeah. I get that. I get that a lot. You're denouncing all of this stuff and you're lefty lib and whatever, and yet you still buy all these plastic goods, and it's like, okay, stand down.
Like I was like, first, I think I responded to the dude. I was like, first of all, I don't know one child that is that aware that they understand, like, no, daddy, don't go to the dollar store to get this fucking bootleg He-Man because, God forbid Chinese fingers made it. You just don't have that understanding as a child. So it's foolish to get mad at two people literally talking about their childhoods. And we're also talking about the problems of capitalism within our childhoods. So it was real interesting to get that fucking bullshit ass comment. And I did respond back to dude. I was like, man, you got to stop it. Like, there's no child I know that understands that, the Star Wars sure is fun, but it'd be even more fun if I knew that the fingers of child labor didn't make it. I was like so fucking mad. But Derek, did you want to riff? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to actually pick up on Pascal's point because I actually know how many foreign military bases all those countries have off the top of my head. North Korea has none. Cuba has none. China does have 4 and arguably 8 more additional ports that it has taken control of via deals in Africa that have the capacity for military use and do have some troops stable there, but they are not technically military bases. So just to put it in scale, the only one that possibly has any, imperial outpost is China. And I do think we're going to see more of that. But it is what one that would be, even if I counted all the unofficial, just where there might be some military at a technically civilian Chinese-owned port in Africa. That is 1/100th of the U.S. U.S. alone, and notice I'm not counting all NATO in that either. Just the U.S. foreign. I mean, so yeah, Pascal's got a point.
Varn, I don't know if you watched The Mandalorian at all. But,
I do. I just mainlined it actually, because I actually have hated Star Wars nostalgia for a long time. I like all of 2 Star Wars movies, one recent one in the original. I know that's heresy, but I really only like Return of the Jedi. Not Return of the Jedi.
Empire Strikes Back.
Empire Strikes Back. I have a soft spot for Return of the Jedi because I saw it in theaters as a kid. So like there's some well of emotion that I cannot control, even though I think it's an objectively bad movie. And I'm like, but anyway, but I actually really love The Mandalorian because it doesn't try to do much. And I appreciate that.
Here's some action. Eat this action. There's a part of The Mandalorian that I thought was really interesting because I honestly feel like the people that are making The Mandalorian have read Michael Harris's book. I really feel that way because it feels like they really are trying to build on this narrative that the Outer Rim is filled with inequality. So for those that didn't read the book or haven't seen the episode or new to the show, thank you, welcome. So a friend of ours, Michael Harris, wrote a book called Welcome to the Rebellion. This uses Star Wars as a grand narrative for the left. And one thing that he says in the book is, because, people ask the question, if you blew up the Death Star and ended Empire, why does it come back in these new movies? And one thing Harris touches on is, if you watch the movies, there's all this inequality in this Outer Rim region. All the movies, right? Luke lives in this shitty part of town where all the thieves and horrible people live.
Slaves.
What'd you say? Slaves.
Slaves. Tatooine was full of slaves.
Jakku, where the new character Rey comes from, she's a bit of a slave. Anakin Skywalker,
She's a bit of a slave.
bit of a slave. She's a bit
weekends, on weekends.
slave adjacent. I believe
she's a wage slave.
But there's just no hope in these places, right? These are like space ghettos, if you will. And the Mandalorian kind of, does what hoods do. As Torre calls him, a space pimp, because Torre goes, why does he have to have the goddamn cape? He goes, the cape is not necessary. And I was like, Torre, it's because you can't be pimpified if you don't have a cape. So Torre refers to the Mandalorian as a space pimp every time.
Yeah.
But anyway, and I hope you're watching, Torre. So anyway, there's all this inequality in the Outer Rim, and there's an episode with Bill Burr, which I thought was really good. I was like, didn't know what to expect with Bill.
He's
Burr.
a friggin' gem.
He nailed it on this. So in the episode, they're supposed to be going to a military base, an ex-Empire base that now the Republic has, but the people that live on this planet are still being subjected to colonialism, and they hate it. They hate the Empire. They hate the Republic. And Bill Burr calls out, he goes, Empire, Republic, these people just don't care. And in that episode, which I thought was, in my mind just went, I was like, there's no way in the world they didn't read Harris's book. Where so they have to sneak into the thing and then to get the secret to find the Baby Yoda, which has a name now, but you guys don't care. But we'll just call it Baby Yoda. And Dan, do you remember what the general guy says about how they're going to take back, how the Empire is going to regain power?
I believe he says they'll beg us to come back.
Yeah, he was like, they'll beg us to come back into power. And of course, the Mandalorian is supposed to be set about 30 years before we get these new, The Force Awakens and Rise of Skywalker.
So hold on a second. The Mandalorian takes place when Yoda is a baby?
No, it takes place after Return of the Jedi.
He's the same species as Yoda, so because he didn't have a name, correct? Because he has the same species, everybody just sort of called him Baby Yoda, and Disney wasn't letting his name out.
That would be throwing a whole timeline off, because I do know Yoda is like 900 years old. Right?
I appreciate your commitment to continuity.
They're working within also so I think Lucas was around for the cartoons, right?
Didn't Lucas for the first round of them, right? For
Clone Wars,
yeah.
Which dives also deeper into the story of Empire and authoritarianism. And it also starts to paint a certain picture of the Jedi as not all good, because they're killing clones. They're sending clones to their death willy-nilly. And
Right.
there's all kind of issues that come up to the point where Rosario Dawson, her character in the cartoons, breaks away from the Jedi Order altogether and is like, you guys aren't all good. And it was because she got away from her seat of power with the Jedi and actually was sitting down with real people in the fight and was like, oh shit, there's some problems here.
Right.
And I found that very, very interesting that like this is the way that Lucas was trying to go with the series. And for a lot of people, it was just hard. I mean, when you wanted to explain how a society becomes totalitarian, that everybody wants to watch 2.5 hours of disagreements of tax laws and trade agreements. But a lot of that shit.
So that theme pops up in other science fiction too, right? Like in episode 1, The Phantom Menace, when little Annie's a little kid, and Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan show up and they're trying to get him, and he basically gambles, right? He gambles to get Anakin as his property so they can get him off the planet, but they don't take care of his mom. His mom's still a slave. They don't take care of anybody else there. Qui-Gon's not like, look, Obi-Wan, when we get back to the Jedi Temple, we need to talk to Yoda and Mace Windu and the guy with the pointy head and be like, we need to go free all those slaves.
There's slavery out there? Like, no.
Bullshit.
They never even call that out.
No, and so in Star Trek, which is considered a very, very progressive, sort of idealistic vision of the future and space and whatever, they have the Prime Directive. And the Prime Directive specifically says, don't mess with planets that aren't light speed capable yet. If they don't have the ability to leave their planets and explore the world and the universe, you do not interfere with their politics. You do not interfere with the planet. And so a lot of the drama around Star Trek episodes over several series is whether or not they're going to interfere in these societies, as opposed to just saying, this is wrong, and whenever we see it, we have to stop it.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
There was an old, it's by a liberal writer, but there's an old David Brin essay about how the politics of early Star Trek in particular are pretty progressive, but the politics of Star Wars are actually accidentally really reactionary. And my argument against him actually was the prequels aren't. Now, I say that with also saying, like, George Lucas was an old boomer and the prequels are full of racist stereotypes made into aliens, but the structure of the plot, so I don't want to get mad at me and like ignore the fact that, yeah, I get that, yes, there's all kinds of subconscious racism in the prequel, but the structure of the plot is actually about complicated trade deals, pulling from both history and the Roman Empire and the Cold War. And we have to remember that Lucas did originally think he was doing Flash Gordon as a metaphor for the Viet Cong.
Yes.
In the original Star Wars. But he also imported all these ancient religious ideas, which I do think have a kind of reactionary import. And being that they weren't really from his own culture, he didn't catch that. And there you go. You have the contradictions that go into things. And I would also like to think, we did talk about the Mandalorian a little bit. I think some of that, maybe they did read Michael Harris's book, but I think some of that also is like the Mandalorian is clearly based on revisionist Westerns, which also all deal with the same thing. Particularly once you get out of like the Western as the conquering of the frontier mode, and it's all like, yay, look at our big white imperialist project, which America always was. And they have to actually deal with that. The Western has to deal with the fact that the frontier was precarious. It was bad for everybody. It was ugly. And particularly when you started looking at it beyond, a triumphal beating of the indigenous peoples, and that's the source material for the Mandalorian. And it's actually going through some of the same things, but in, shiny lasers. And so like Disney, in spite of itself, because I think Disney is one of those weird companies that like has always been, even before it was cool, superficially woke, but has always been deeply conservative, even when it didn't seem to be. that because of the genre that it's pulling from, you can't help it. Like, and I think that's, why I do think understanding like genre discourses are important, because they bring stuff in. And I think maybe Jon Favreau may not be an idiot, may actually know what he's doing with that. Like, because if it looks like a revisionist Western in space and it deals with some of the same things and it deals with the complications of and the ambivalence of the project, then of course it's gonna be honest. It can't not be honest about it, because the genre it's pulling from is trying to be honest about it. In flawed ways. I mean, it's contradictory, and just like the first Star Wars was like, and I also would go on to Star Trek. I love that about Star Trek, the Prime Directive, but I will say that part of the weirdness of Star Trek, and particularly the further you get away from Roddenberry, whose politics and everything but gender are pretty good. His gender politics are shit. But particularly as you get away from Roddenberry, the Prime Directive pretty much exists to be violated. So as things go further and further and further, and so all these things get up. My other favorite contradiction of Star Trek is you have a post-scarcity society that still has money for some reason. Like, even though it makes a big deal out of it does make a big deal out of not having money early on, but then they just can't imagine what that would look like, so they give up, so money's introduced later. Like,
is that part of that thing Pascal was talking about, how we have to what did you say was 800 TV shows and movies they interfered in?
Yeah.
I mean,
the book I was talking about, it's called National Security State.
And Pascal wrote a piece.
Security Cinema, excuse me.
Pascal wrote a piece last year in Black Agenda Report about a man named Clarence Avant, and there is a documentary on Netflix about Clarence Avant, if you haven't seen it, called Black Godfather, talking about how Clarence Avant was. Would you say he's a CIA plant, or not plant, but like?
I don't have the evidence to make that allegation. It's just that I would say that he worked very closely with high-level ranking members of the Democratic Party to fuse Black popular culture during the rise of the reactionary Nixon administration into being a facilitator of Democratic electoral success, and basically help turn Black pop culture that would start to proliferate in the 70s into this kind of racial confirmation of American exceptionalism and blackface. In other words, America is wonderful because they let us have Soul Train and Good Times and all of this other stuff, but those things were only done to demobilize the radical rebellions and riots that were going on in the late 60s, early 70s. In other words, this infusion of Black popular culture and media, which included Black affairs television shows, was a pacification technique, which is in the Kerner Commission report assigned by LBJ and basically implemented with Nixon to neutralize the rebellious political spirit in the urban dwellings throughout the country and get Black folk to be indoctrinated into more aesthetically pleasing popular culture imagery.
So I want to ask everybody this. So, and I don't know exactly how white either one of you are. You guys might be super white where you never watch Good Times, because there's people like that exist. Trust me. I told you where I live. So, and I'm partially fucking with y'all. So if you think about Good Times, the character Michael, the youngest brother, was the revolutionary character that was almost kind of looked at as a joke whenever he had his revolutionary politics. Almost like very patronizing, pat you on the head, like, oh, that's so cute.
The fact that he was a child says a lot in itself.
So, and I'll add to that, juxtapose him with Alex P. Keaton of Family Ties.
Yes.
Who's making fun of his parents for being revolutionary. Yeah, you were hippies and you protested. Isn't that so cute? But at the end of the day, capitalism wins. We all want nice shit.
Right.
What do you guys think of that?
I think it's objectively the case. I grew up watching that and the Jeffersons, and the Jeffersons is probably like ground zero for some of that messaging. Like
Nixonian Black capitalism.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's exactly what it is. And and I grew up in Central Georgia, man. So like
Oh, I'm fucking with you, Varn.
yeah, I know. Like black pop culture is like pretty much the only thing we had.
Dan, on the other hand,
it was black pop culture and also the Dukes of Hazzard. Like those existed like simultaneously, constantly bombarded into my head. Like that's what we watched. We watched the Dukes of Hazzard, and we'd watch the Jeffersons. We'd watch Red Fox. We'd watch Sanford and Son. I mean, it's the same thing. We'd watch. We'd watch Family Ties. I actually didn't like a lot of the whiter sitcoms as a kid because that didn't look like my world. For one thing, because they weren't showing like working. The only sitcom that ever came close to looking like my world was either the black ones or it was like the Anshia Bucker stuff. That was it. That was pretty much it.
What about you, Dan? Same thing for you?
I think for me, I really honestly, I'm familiar with Good Times. I didn't watch it. I don't know if it just wasn't broadcast in my area or if I came to it a little bit later. For me, it was more Cosby Show. It would have been because Cosby Show, it was Cosby Show at 8, or 8:30, I think, and then Cheers was on after that. So it would have been the two of them together as that sort of dichotomy of white suburban.
It was Cosby Show and then Different World.
I think that was after.
Came a little bit later.
That's like early 90s. Like,
but yeah, it would have been after that. Yep. After Family Ties went off the air, Different World would have come in. Yeah.
And if you remember, the original cast for Different World has Marissa Tomei in it.
Oh,
yeah. I do remember that now that you point that out. Oh my God.
I remember that. And when they kicked her off and Denise, and the show became a success.
But as far as your point about Good Times being this sort of caricature of intentional caricaturization, and Alex P. Keaton being that sort of contrast of those two characters, I think you're spot on with that point. As far as wanting to tell a specific story about how unconsciously you should view these kinds of opinions and interests from people, and I think you're correct in saying that you put that perspective on the child so that you can speak down to it.
Yeah.
Which is crazy when you go back and watch those shows, because I do go back and watch that.
Absolutely.
and if you watch A Different World, and I think Pascal and I don't remember if we said this on air or not, go back and watch A Different World. It's on Amazon. And look at Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris would have been a hero on Different World with her politics right now.
Right.
Because that was also the politics of the time, which was, what?
Like, the interesting thing about the Different World, Cosby Show iteration of black popular culture in the 80s or whatnot is the class dimension of the types of black folk you see depicted. I mean, as much as the Jeffersons is a celebration of black capitalism, they still come out of the black underclass and move on up, right? Whereas opposed to Cosby, you're talking about like, black petit bourgeois, second generation, third generation, historically black college graduate, probably, Jack and Jill members, et cetera, et cetera. All of these kind of petit bourgeois social organizations that exist within the black community, that when we had Cedric Johnson and Torrey Reed on, we were talking about how the left, particularly the white left, has no understanding of how these class infrastructures in the black community create a buffer class of a black petit bourgeois who works as a kind of comprador elite with the ruling class, and are the spaces from which you get your Kamala Harris's, even lesser so your Obamas, but your other black political class individuals who end up creating this illusion of a black politics that's really a class politics in which they work at the behest of the ruling class to maintain their own position in exchange for patronage from the ruling class under the charade of racial unity. And there's not a lot besides Black Agenda Report and a few other people like Kiana Yamana Taylor, who started to write about this, but Adolph Reed has been writing about this for years as well. Torrey and Cedric as well. Those brothers who come out of that kind of black left tradition of interrogating black political formations in that way have talked about this, and it's very difficult for this kind of analysis to get traction, not only amongst liberal discourse, but also amongst the left because they're not familiar with the social mechanisms and infrastructures in Black society that allow these things to facilitate.
So I have to. What's funny is Pascal and I he's a little older than me, and old enough like just to be a little more aware of certain shit. So when we talk about Cosby Show, he gets hella mad. He says, "No way in the world you could have lived in New York at that time." And I don't know why when I do an impersonation of you sound like my mom, but because you do not at all. I do want to play this. I found a clip, and I have to play this clip. I think it's funny, and I want to hear you guys riff on this clip, and then I'll stop playing clips.
Yo.
Everybody can hear, right?
Hard to get good help, isn't it? Son, your mother asked me to come up here and kill you.
Hey, I know.
You know what?
What you gonna say? And it's under control. So,
No problem. Right. How do you expect to get into college with grades like this?
No problem.
Huh?
See, I'm not going to college.
Damn right.
I am gonna get through high school and then get a job like regular people.
Regular people?
Yeah, you know, who work in the gas station, drive a bus, something like that.
So what you're saying is your mother and I shouldn't care if you get D's because you don't need good grades to be regular people.
Right.
Okay. Oh, suppose you graduate from high school. Let's say you just slide by. All right, now you got to find a job. Now, what kind of salary do you expect for a regular person?
$250 a week.
$250 a week?
Yeah.
Sit down. I'm going to give you $300 a week. Yes, indeed. $300 a week, $1,200 a month. All right?
Great, I'll take it.
Yes, you will. And I will take $350 for taxes.
Whoa.
Huh? Yeah. Now, because, see, the government comes for the regular people first. Now, how much does that leave you with?
$850.
All right. Now, you've got to have an apartment because you are not going to live here. So, an apartment in Manhattan will run you at least $400 a month.
I'll live in New Jersey.
All right. You live in New Jersey, you've got to have a car.
I'll ride a motorbike.
You need a helmet. Figure $100 a month for clothes and shoes.
Figure 200. I want to look good.
Okay, so what does that leave you with?
$200. So, no problem.
There is a problem. You haven't eaten yet.
I can get by on bologna and cereal. So, I got everything I need, plus $200 left for the month.
You plan to have a girlfriend?
For sure.
Regular people.
Yeah.
That was let me get this off there. Sorry about that. That was one of that one, and the time that he came home and they made a whole universe for him to that where like Rudy was his landlord and he had to buy his furniture back. And what's funny about that episode, which I cannot relate to, I can't speak for anybody else here, is if you remember when he comes home and everything's gone, they give him an envelope and they started him off with like $1,500. Like, we're your parents and we love you, and here's $1,500 to start off with. I'm sure there are people out there that it happened to him. It didn't happen at my house, where my parents was like, hey, we love you. Here's some money to go live your life.
Nope.
But that I don't know if you remember, a lot of the discourse during that time was that the Cosby Show was too unrealistic because it was a black doctor and a black lawyer. And then
that's a very bad critique, man, because we have lots of reactionary black people with that kind of pedigree. They exist all over the country.
No, I'm saying
they're not disproportionately high in number, but they exist. Of course, we have historically black colleges that have been producing high numbers of black professionals and whatnot, and they make up the professional managerial class of black folk who have, that's why black politics is a class politics. It caters to that class of black folk who don't care about the working class because they are regular people, and that they're not particularly interested in the problems of regular people because regular people didn't go to college. Like, they say that a good human being has to go to, and if you didn't go to college, you're not a good human being. It doesn't talk about how the good people who went to college, who went to grad school, have student loans, who are now making less money than regular people who became welders or plumbers.
Hell yes.
Particularly the ones who happen to be black as well. You know what I'm saying? Doesn't talk about that because black women disproportionately are burdened by student loans. By the way, if we want to use those disparity statistics. So it's fascinating how the regular people who have trades like being, carpenters, plumbers, union members, welders, end up actually making more cake and with less debt than the good people who went to college and graduate school. I have a friend of mine who's an attorney. He's a solo practitioner, and he represents abused children in DC. He does very noble work, but he says, hey man, with student loan debt and the money I put into my kid and the fact that I'm, he's 50 years old, he's like, he still has not bought his first house. I pretty much make as much money as a McDonald's manager with a law degree. And that's real talk.
Yeah, there's some idealism that goes along with at least the way I was raised, where my personal experience, there's some idealism that goes along with when you're taking out those student loans. And, my parents sort of saw it as their mission to get me to that point, right? Like they weren't able to pay for the school. Those loans are in my name, not theirs. They didn't, my father didn't go he didn't have a degree until he was almost out of the military. He spent 30 years in the Navy and then basically was like, hey, I'm about to get out. I'm going to take advantage of all these programs. And he ended up getting a doctorate in education. My mother doesn't have a degree. She never did any, sort of post-high school education or anything like that. But they saw it as their role was to get myself and my two brothers to the point where we could get those loans for college. And then whatever we did with them, that was on us. They let us choose our own, educational paths, those sort of things. And so I know from my own personal experience, there's some idealism that goes along with that. You sort of say, well, what do I want to do with my time? What do I want to be in when I'm an adult and grow up and whatever? And so my degree is in art. And that didn't pay anything. So this idea that a college degree automatically means money on the other side is not a thing necessarily. And, I know that's on me. But
and that was a theme of those shows too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So there's this sort of idealism that I think the boomer generation grew up with that said, because I think for them, that was their experience. You get a degree, you get a better job, you live that sort of, not normal life, or at least the higher end of the normal.
Well, they were the last generation who were able to taste some of the largesse that spilled over from the New Deal era into the early 70s and 60s and was able to carry them because of the deregulation of the financial services of the 80s and creating a balloon that seemed like economic prosperity it carried them into the 80s and 90s, and when they were starting to come to retirement. You know what I'm saying? But their kids, being my generation, Generation X, and the ones younger, they were just coming up with debt. And so a lot of them made nice salaries, but a lot of those nice salaries, those 6-figure salaries plus, was going to debt servicing, mortgage servicing.
Do we all?
It's common that you find a lot of those folks who are professionals who are still trying to catch up, subsidizing their life in a way that their parents didn't have to worry about, who had less education or less quality, less professional managerial class job levels.
And at the same time, too, we start to see movies that shift away from the Cold War, and we're seeing more movies that deal with finance.
Yes, the Wall Street.
Wall Street, and one of my favorites that was filmed not too far from where I'm sitting. Do you remember Quicksilver with Kevin Bacon, where he's a bike messenger in San Francisco?
Familiar with it, didn't see it.
I'm the only motherfucker that saw it. It was just me that saw that shit. Larry Fishburne is the hood bike messenger.
Didn't have a sword wielding barbarian in it or a laser gun. I missed it. I'm sorry.
So Kevin Bacon plays a Wall Street type stockbroker, and he loses his parents' savings in some sort of stock scam, and he loses everything. And on his way to make his big deal, which he fucked up, he had saw a bike messenger. And so when he loses everything, he takes a little money he has and he buys a bicycle, and he becomes a bike messenger and solves crime delivering packages. I'm being totally serious. But, in his bike messengering, he meets up with funny man Paul Rodriguez and what is Jamie Gertz, and Larry Fishburne is the foil. He's a bike messenger that's making money on the under, pushing dope. Or delivering dope, literally delivering.
Yeah.
So Kevin Bacon wins a bunch of money, gets a bunch of money for people through the stock market because that's what he knows how to do, and everybody's happy because Kevin Bacon is a stockbroker. There's movies like The Secret of My Success with Michael J. Fox. A lot of movies where some guy from the mailroom sneaks into the big office and pretends and then becomes the CEO. Is that financialization showing us their hand in the
romanticization of financialization?
Say that 3 times fast.
Romanticization of financialization. Romanticization of financialization. Let's say it again. No, I think that there was an era where we had those movies, right? That even though the Wall Street degenerates were criminals, it still made it seem like, ooh, this is sexy. This is wow.
Yeah. Even in the sequel.
Yeah, and that whole...
Yeah, I won't watch The Wolf of Wall Street for that reason. And that guy's a piece of shit. That guy's a piece of shit.
So this is a whole part of this whole, like, sell. What was the one that had my man...
Eddie Murphy?
No, not Eddie Murphy. Well, Trading Places was funny.
I just wrote that down.
Yeah, it was funny, and it romanticized it as well. The same kind of effect.
I literally just Googled. I wanted to get the exact date. 83 on Trading Places, 85 on Brewster's Millions.
Yeah.
Brewster's Millions. I watched Brewster's. Do you remember that movie?
Yeah, I do.
Pascal, do you remember that movie?
I don't remember, but I remember the name.
End of his movie deal with, I can't remember which movie company he had, where he had to make like 100 million movies, and he was coked out of his fucking gourd making some of these movies. Brewster's Millions is the one where he's a minor league baseball player, and his uncle dies, and he has to spend, how many millions was it?
I think it was like 30 million or something like that. I'm sure it's a number that now we'd look on it and be like, oh, that's cute, There's
still a lot of money he had to spend in like a month, and then he could get like 100 million or 200 million.
Exactly.
Some ridiculous amount of money.
The whole idea was that he wanted to make him hate money. The father, grandfather, uncle, whoever it was, had been forced to smoke cigarettes, right? Like he'd been caught smoking, and he made him smoke cigarettes or cigars or whatever it was. And he was like, money ruined everything I had, and I'm going to make it so that you hate money. And then, he sets this challenge up. If you can spend X number of dollars, A, I'll give you even more, and B, I'll prove that you'll hate it.
Because Jeff Bezos has proven that all wrong.
But what does he do with that money ultimately? What does he decide that he can spend that money quickly doing?
Was it charity? I don't remember.
He runs for office.
He trumped it.
He runs for office, yeah. And he on the campaign of vote for none of the above.
Wow. You remember Brewster's Millions way better than I do.
That was one that, I don't know. It was just on TV all the time. My brother and I always ended up watching it for some reason.
That and the toy.
See, and that I've never seen. You'd think I'd seen that one. I've never seen
it. The toy is just like, oh, you really needed money for dope.
That's
didn't
a tough one.
Well, he gets paid to be this
literally be a toy. Yeah.
You remember that movie, Varn?
No, I don't remember that one.
Good.
Trading Spaces and Brewster's Millions, and I remember Trading Spaces even as a kid seeming weird. I remember feeling like I couldn't figure out what it was trying to tell me about wealth, because it seemed to be both critiquing it and celebrating it at the same time in the way it utterly confused me. And
with you to be wealthy, then it's totally fine.
Yeah, I remember watching it at a friend's house because I had HBO, right? Like, so yeah. But it's interesting to think about those waves of movies, though, because you have a first wave of Cold War movies, and they're my favorite example for that is to watch the Stallone arc. Like, you can learn a lot from watching Stallone go reactionary, right?
From Rocky to what?
From Rocky to Rocky Balboa, or from Rambo to Rocky and Rambo are both like working class critique movies, right? Like, and also the underdog doesn't win. They're actually legitimately good movies. And Rambo, the first one, it is a working class vet being harassed by cops. People forget that's the plot. That's pretty much it. You know, it's
he's a drifter. He's a drifter with some serious PTSD.
Exactly. And both those series is by Rambo, by Rambo 3, he's fighting with the Mujahideen. By the current incarnation of Rambo, he's single-handedly taking on the drug cartels. That's what happened before COVID hit. And Rocky, he's, a lone star who can't win, and he has to make friends with his enemy, who's also kind of a hyped up, boxer but is a black man, and they're both kind of oppressed minorities, so they share more than they don't, and that actually comes out in the movies. And then by the fourth one, he's like ending the Cold War by beating up a guy. So like,
change.
You literally can watch in one person's career, go through that. Eddie Murphy's also interesting too, because he did a lot of stuff that was close to edgy satire on contemporary trends, but often reinforces normalcy at the end, particularly in his 80s movies. And Trading Places is one of them. Coming to America is another one. That both seems to be critiquing racist stereotypes and totally engaging in them, and critiquing American xenophobia and totally engaging in it simultaneously. Because at the time, that was how we could get movies made.
Eddie Murphy, I don't know, Pascal, how do you feel about Eddie Murphy? Are you an Eddie Murphy fan at all? Are you like
I think I fondly remember the work that Eddie Murphy did in the 80s.
Oh no.
80s vanguard of really a certain time. But Eddie Murphy kind of succeeds in a way that comedians transitioned in the 80s, particularly black comedians, away from the tradition of kind of like Flip Wilson and Dick Gregory, in that those guys were social critics. In other words, they were critiquing society. They were punching up about power, And just like to remember the famous, what's the name of the white comedian who passed away that a lot of people on the left like to use, George Carlin. George Carlin used to punch up. And to me, those are the comedians that I always kind of admired the most. But the thing that always fascinated me about Eddie Murphy, even though I knew that he was a brilliant talent and was legitimately funny, he was profoundly apolitical in terms of like his comedy, right? Like, you know, I mean, he would make fun about different groups of people and whatnot, but like Eddie Murphy was never like making fun about the establishment, the governing infrastructure, or anything else, yet received a profound amount of success. So I see that as part of the way I look at the 80s and popular culture comprehensively as a conservative project, causing American society to become more conservative. But I see it particularly Black popular culture as well, fulfilling that same type of paradigm, the same type of goal in taking away social criticism out of comedy, sitcoms, television, comedians, performers, films, totally, and reducing it kind of to like an entertainment for the sake of entertainment. So as much as I respect Eddie Murphy's comedic talent, which was genius, I also realized that it starts this trend of apoliticism in entertainment that really becomes a kind of genuflection to the reactionary conservative time that starts taking off. It doesn't start completely, it starts taking off in the 80s.
Well, then you have Def Jam.
Well, Def Jam was kind of like Black capitalism to a hip hop beat, you know? I mean, when you really think about it.
I think you just killed Jason.
I looked away from the screen for a second, and when I came back, he was gone. I was like, did he run out of the room? Like, what happened?
Man, no, fuck that. Russell Simmons and Donald Trump are like homies.
Yeah, they are. I mean, Def Jam.
I wouldn't right now.
Becomes, I mean, yeah, it's a profoundly successful hip hop record label started by Rick Rubin and Russell Simmons. I would argue more by Rick Rubin than Russell Simmons. And they really become like the embodiment of like hip hop recording in the 80s, particularly. And they were very successful and very well kind of managed and all of that stuff. But again, you know, as much as hip hop is known or perceived to be countercultural or to be antagonistic to the ruling class, you know, like, you know, you gotta fight for your right to party. Like the quote unquote radical aspects and elements of hip hop music are the super minority of the music, even in the golden age.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, like a lot of hip hop, like you listen to LL Cool J, totally apolitical, great MC, great rapper, music about braggadocio. I got the ladies, the flyest ladies, you know, really about like young black male kind of sexual coming of age. You know, I'm fly, I'm fine, the ladies love me. But divorced of really political kind of commentary, right? Then you have Public Enemy, which everyone is like, yeah, Public Enemy. Public Enemy has a lot of kind of like reactionary, kind of black nationalist kind of tropes in it, going back to like mixing in various elements of the Black Panthers, divorced of the challenge to capitalism, and reifying aspects of the Nation of Islam that basically blames the problems of black people on the social defects of black people as opposed to the systems that create those defects.
Now, do you think, and I'll ask this one quick question, and we're starting to run on time a little bit here. The way you talk about Def Jam reminds me of one thing. Has everybody seen the movie Less Than Zero?
Yeah.
Why am I missing this stuff?
Because you're older than you were reading books and you were going to school at this time, and you was doing this shit. You was in college.
No, I'm not that. I'm different.
So school days is gonna be your clip. You gotta get a school.
I remember school days. Didn't like it.
Wherever you is, you still in the if you think about Less Than Zero, there's I've seen the movie way too many times, and I even fucking read that book. Bret Easton Ellis.
Yep, I've read it.
And it's way apparently not even apparently, the book is a totally different story than the movie. And it's very, 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 very graphic. A lot of things were changed. But anyway, if you remember that movie, there's some scenes where they're looking for Robert Downey Jr.'s character, who actually says he started smoking crack while filming that movie. There's some scenes where when they're looking for him, you hear LL Cool J playing and Run DMC playing. And I think Rick Rubin actually did do the soundtrack. But there is something to be said about that movie resonating with that crowd as well. I mean, this movie, if you go back and watch the movie, they talk about it in the book a little bit, which I thought was kind of funny. Every time they go to a party, there's a valet. That's how rich these kids are. That they like, even in the scenes where like he's got to rescue his girl, he pulls up and he fucking gives the keys to the valet, and then he runs in. Like, did you just give the keys to the valet before you saved your girl from your best friend who's a drug dealer? But I don't even know why he's a drug dealer, because apparently you guys all went to the same private schools. And again, if you read the book, like Derek said, you read the book, it goes in depth on the parents. And it tells you what the parents did and why they're all so fucking rich. Somebody said they tried to watch Less Than Zero 4 times and never finished it. You know what? I don't know what to tell you. That maybe we should watch it as a show, because I'm more than happy to sit there and watch it with everybody and be like, that's my favorite part.
You know, Bret Easton Ellis, was working in the 80s, actually illustrates the point, and I'm going to be the Marx nerd for a second, but it's sort of my job. But the Ingalls used to make about like reactionary literature, that it's often better to read it because it's more honest about what's actually going on in society, and often paints both social stratification and also the just utter grossness of all the social classes in a very realistic way. And I think, frankly, that's what Bret Easton Ellis ends up being good for, despite the fact he has center reactionary politics and kind of always has. I think that that's the power of that book, and also the power of American Psycho as a book. And it's also like, that's beyond the political, predilection of its authors, because I know like today there are certain people who in the left younger than us, because right now, let's be honest, we're speaking to a very specific demographic. Like, you have to remember the 80s the first time around.
Yeah.
So like, not the nostalgia for the 80s has been going on for the last 15 years. And you can't be too old, because this would have been irrelevant to you too. So but I find it interesting to think about that, because when you watch something like Less Than Zero, you can see this hot bourgeois culture. Another person who's also an arch actual conservative, Whit Stillman, who did all those movies about decaying rich people and how gross and stupid they kind of were, is a good thing to watch for that too. And so,
which movie?
Oh God, Cosmopolitan.
Okay.
Actually, The Last Days of Disco is also great for it too. You can see, Barcelona, that whole trilogy. And he quit making movies and became a conservative pundit after that. But the thing is, he makes all those rich, hot bourgeois conservatives and their flirtations with the left and the right. It just satirizes them all ruthlessly. I find that in some ways, in some of these kinds of movies, these conservatives are more allowed to be honest than other people are, frankly. I mean, like like if you're kind of coming out of radical culture, you can't be too honest. I mean, you think about a movie that, you know, we talked about this before, Jason, but like you go back and watch Spike Lee, which is not unproblematic, but Do the Right Thing, and then watch Boys in the Hood, and they were always seen as linked movies. Boys in the Hood is crime bill propaganda, like
Feels
straight
like
up.
Feels like it to me. And we actually did a whole episode about Boys in the Hood and watched the clips. And unfortunately, I wanted to get more clips in. My Wi-Fi had effed up because I was trying to get clips in from the harder Boys in the Hood, if you will, which is Menace to Society.
Menace to Society.
Which is like it's scene for, I went back and watched Menace to Society, and it's scene for scene Boys in the Hood. And it was like they said, we got to be a little bit harder. And even the like, yeah, the family friend dying, like all that shit is like the exact same movie. But we're over 2 hours, which is a little long. I know people have days and shit they want to do. I done woke Derek up, and I know Pascal was trying to sleep in. So Dan Larson, thank you so much for taking the time to come on here and not have a conversation about toys and cartoons, but still talk about toys and cartoons.
That's why I wanted to be on this show. It's a great outlet to have, and I appreciate you having me on again.
No. So if you guys don't know, Dan Larson hosts one of my favorite shows on YouTube, Toy Galaxy. He talks about, of course, toys, pop culture, TV shows of the 80s that I can't believe that he watched that I watched, like Manimal.
Oh God.
All 8 episodes.
I thought I was the only motherfucker that remember. I forgot about Manimal so hard. I thought that shit was a dream. And when I saw that was a show, I'm all trying to call my.
I gotta
girl.
rethink my life.
I was like, I knew that shit was. And she's looking at me like, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. A goddamn Manimal. To Street Hawk, if you remember Street Hawk, about the motorcycle. And then he did one on Automan.
Oh God. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So and Dan did an episode on Turbo Team. And
let's not forget also that we have Kali Akuno as our guest coming up on Tuesday from Cooperation Jackson, Mississippi.
Awesome.
That's going to be a good show. Also, we are going to have our Tuesday live stream is going to be airing on Wednesday night on Zero Books.
Oh yeah, you joined the cult.
We're part of the cult. I'm virtually shaking your hand. Yeah, we're part of the Zero Books cult.
Yeah.
Doug presented me with the idea. I was like, Doug, are you sure? Because you sure? So we'll see.
I thought it was a great idea because our audience can be a little bit pale.
Alabaster, if you like to say.
You know, and sometimes I think they associate like you know, black respectability and woke respectability with all black politics, and that's clearly not the case. And so like it's a good thing to expose some people too. And also I think you guys are a good fit. So yeah, and I'm glad to talk to Dan. I've been when you told me, Jason, that you liked his show, I was like, oh, I really like watching that show too. But I'm a weirdo. I am such a weirdo political podcast. I never ask any normies to come on my show for fear of scaring them. So, and I don't do interview shows that much anymore anyway. But like,
now you got to hit Dan up. And also, yeah. Dan, Gene wanted you to know he's actually grew up in the UK, but he's a huge fan of your show because you actually talk about shit that he knows. Like when I was like, hey, Eugene, you know about this Action Force? He goes, Action Force? I love Action Force.
That's a symptom of the show. Like if you go back far enough in our archive, there's a point where I start realizing like, oh, we're reaching a global audience, and I should start writing the show that way instead of just centralizing, my personal domestic experience and saying, in the US and this and whatever, and start talking about it on a more global level. One, it's good for engaging a larger audience, and two, it's just good for business. And I'm not stupid,
And the reason why I like Dan is because he had an episode actually where he went into why Toys R Us died, and he actually brought up the whole fact about the leverage buyout. And he's had a couple. I think you've had a couple episodes where we actually bring up leverage buyouts, and
it happened a lot.
So, and Dan also brings up things like oil embargoes, the reason why certain toys don't happen, and he really, in the 10-15 minutes that he does a show, he does a deep dive. If you want to get away for a little bit from all of the talk about AOC and forcing votes and Medicare for all, and you want to remember a time.
I think it's really fascinating. We have someone like Dan who does a show that talks about the political economy of toys in America and the politics of framing toys in terms of greater global political agendas. I think that's actually kind of fascinating to take that take. And I think it's actually, call me whatever you want. I think it's a good utilization of left politics, quite frankly, because lots of lefties have kids. Lots of people have kids. And, for me, who grew up with a kind of politics in my family where challenging empire was the norm. My parents came from Haiti and they had kind of left politics back then. I mean, I think I kind of instinctually as a kid was aware that Captain America was about some propaganda. Like, I don't think I'm necessarily the norm in that regard, but I think that it is good to have someone with an expertise in toys and, child entertainment be able to break that down for us to see, well, what you were watching when you were a kid in 1985 was actually XYZ ABC. And I can tell you this because if you look at the script and the people who did this, this is what their agenda was. I think that's very important because those agendas are still playing out right now in things that are maybe even a little bit more noxious and infamous, like video games, and in many other ways that people are going to be blind to actually make that analysis. So shout out to you, Dan. I think you're doing a serious service.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to leave. I'm going to play a clip. I'm not going to tell you where this clip is coming from, but I want you guys to put on your parachute pants and your high top kicks. Lay some cardboard down. If you have a little money, get in the linoleum if your kitchen's wide enough. And this is my favorite scene from this movie because in all of my life, 43 years, I've never seen a fight like this. Never. I've seen some battles, but never have I seen people meet to duke it out like this in the streets. So we will end with maybe one of the greatest clips of all time.
I love these movies, unironically.
The fight scene. And also shout out to the late Shabadoo, who recently passed away. I think he passed away on the 31st.
No.
And also Kelly, the woman you see right there, is also in Ninja 3 The Domination, which almost got played, but I had to do this. So enjoy, people.
Punk. Try me.
Combat. Attention. You have just entered a battle zone.
It's time for us to find out who's really the best with the freshest crew. No time for words, we're through with that. All there is left.
Also, keep in mind, this is in like South Central LA during the height of the crack years.
Now we're all here, both of the crew. Someone will win, someone will lose, but we must battle to decide. Keep honor and his pride. We've got to move.
Taking the jacket off.
We've got to experience.
Kelly was a thick one right there. Is Kelly the first thick white chick that we see?
She's one of my earliest crushes for sure. No doubt, man. No doubt.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Nunchuck. Not going to use them on you because that would defeat the purpose of the dance battle that no one can honestly judge. Uh-oh. Ah! What?
This is like Civil War.
This is what those people should have done on Capitol Hill. What?
How dare you, ma'am?
The look of like anger right there. You. I'll show you. What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do?
Woo! Oh no! Hey, that's not dancing.
Yo, this is hilarious.
Get it. Get it. Uh-oh. Turbo. Lights out. Uh-oh. Ooh.
Oh, no way. Decisive victory. Decisive.
Bam. It's over.
Send the message.
There you go, guys.
That's awesome, man.
I had to end it with the dance fight scene, break into Electric Boogaloo. Again, that's crack era LA, but that's a part of LA that apparently no one talks about. The underground.
Everybody was too afraid to go there, man. You saw it. Scary.
When he does this shit, that's my favorite part. He's just like, ah!
So good.
All right. Thank you guys for watching the stream. We'll be back Tuesday. Derek, when's your next show?
We have a video coming out on Monday, hopefully. Shows on the next Pop the Left will be on Thursday. I have no idea what we're talking about. We were going to talk about historical materialism and dialectical materialism and some boring shit, but like Doug and I were like, should we not talk about the everything? And I think we will probably talk about the everything. And then there should be sometime in the next week, there'll be another Mortal Science out from Emancipation Network, which is an even deeper, nerdier, and more obscure dive into communist theory. Because that's the shit I do. Weirdly.
That's why we're on Zero Books. We're on Zero Books now because diversity.
Well, I mean, I'm not. Yeah.
Doug Lane is now the Joe Biden of the left internet.
But proportionally, we're probably more diverse than the entire DSA now. But anyway,
That's not saying much.
Not saying much at all. Yeah, I think there's eight of us, and now I only think three of us are white, and I think only one person's a WASP. So,
All right, guys.
All right.